everyone. Rabbi Steve Schwartz with you today, our ritual director, Ben Kreshtool, our weekly ongoing discussions of the Torah portion, the Parashat Shavua, the portion of the week. And Ben beginning a new book of the Torah this Shabbat.
Always exciting.
Yeah, always very exciting. And we're in the second book of the Torah, Exodus. So it's one of these Parshayot that moves along very quickly. There's a lot
true.
of ground covered, right?
Yeah.
From chapter 1, you get the birth of Moses and also the transitional period when the Israelites are becoming enslaved. And then you get this very quick window of Moses's early life being taken in by Pharaoh's daughter, et cetera, et cetera. And by chapter 3, you're already Moses at the burning bush. So things really moving along very, very quickly.
That's true. Yeah, I was actually thinking to myself, like, what would be the sort of main themes? And I think that there are three. There are three significant events that happen in the parasha, and you just sort of nailed them. The first, the beginning. Well, for me, the verse is Vayakom Melech Hadash, right? This new king that arises over Egypt, and there's a whole lot to talk about that. The birth of Moses, right, and growing up in the palace. And I like to skip over the beating of the Egyptian and go straight to the revelation to Moses at the burning bush, which I think is the third significant thing that sort of happens in the parasha. But it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff.
Well, let's take a quick look at, maybe we'll be able to get to all three of those things, but let's start out with that initial thought, that whole thing of a Melech Hadash. Like, what is that all about? And, it's a big midrashic thing they get into.
Yeah.
How do you understand that?
So, yeah, I think, there's in the classic rabbinical tradition, there are two ways to sort of see this.
We should say, by the way, V'yako Melech Hadash,
yeah,
there arose a new king.
Right,
Yeah.
over Egypt,
Yeah.
Who, Asher lo yada et Yosef, who did not know Joseph. And I think that's like the funny thing for me. What a weird thing to sort of say. But the classic tradition understands there are two ways to look at this verse. One, that it mamish is a new king, right? Vayakom Melech Hadash, although they tell us that it's interesting when the Bible usually talks about the succession of a new king or a dynasty, it'll say, Vayamot so-and-so dies,
Right.
and then Vayimloch, whoever, the new king comes. Doesn't say that here, which could imply one of two things. One, that it is a new king, that is a new dynasty, right? It's a completely new dynasty that was separate from the other one. Or it's the same king, right, that just decided to change his attitude and knowledge about Joseph or anything like that. I favor the latter interpretation. I think it really is like this new king. It's hard to say, though, that didn't know. How could you have a king who didn't know who Joseph was? Right? It's like a weird.
Given Joseph's prominent position.
Right, and saving of the country. And it would be like this king that probably did know but didn't care or didn't want to know because he has a new political agenda, and Jews don't feature prominently in that new political agenda. I do see it, though, as a new king for sure. I don't see it as the old one.
Yeah.
New attitude.
It seems that way. And how long could the old Pharaoh hang around? He must have been old too, right?
Right.
And partially it's about that. Let's think about Moses' growing up. The truth is very minimal in terms of the information we get. Almost none. Just a couple of quick details. We know the plot that's hatched to kill the Israelite male babies, right? We know about that. We know about Shifra and Pua, who become these kind of interesting heroic figures in the tradition. These are the...
Yeah, we don't talk about enough.
Really not.
Yeah.
And these are the nursemaids who, despite Pharaoh's orders, instead of killing the Israelite babies, save the Israelite babies and figure out a way to do that. But by the way, just like Derech Hagav, there's a whole interesting rabbinic tradition about how the role of women is so important and prominent here.
For sure.
And so you have Bat Paro, you have Pharaoh's daughter, you have Shifra and Pua, you're going to have Miriam, you're going to have Yocheved, right, Moses' mother, and the statement in the Gemara that were it not for the women, Israel would not have been redeemed. It's just an interesting sort of side note. But very quickly, Moses comes into the world, put in the basket, down the river. Pharaoh's daughter takes Moses and into the palace. And then we have all these ideas about Moses growing up in the palace and
Yeah, but they're all midrashic ideas.
Those are all
Yeah.
midrashic ideas, and from, of course, the Ten Commandments movie.
Which is an exceptional film. It is not biblically accurate, but this particular scene when she gets him out of the Nile is a great scene. It's a great scene
yeah, it's a great
in the
scene.
movie.
And so the midrashic tradition around Moses' growing up, really, really fascinating. And you could spend a whole session just talking about that,
You really could.
including the famous midrash, one of the most famous that was so well known that a lot of people actually think it's in the Torah, which
Right.
is the midrash of how Moses becomes impaired in
Yeah.
terms of his speech, and he's a baby. He's presented to Pharaoh in the throne room, and there is a rumor that this baby is going to cause Pharaoh tsuris down the road. So the baby's going to be tested, and of course, there's a plate of coals, there's a plate of jewels. If the baby goes for the jewels, then the baby's going to be killed because that's a dangerous baby. It's looking to take over in the future. And we know the midrash that Moses reaches for the jewels, because what baby wouldn't? It's bright and sparkly. And the angel comes, pushes Moses' hand. He grabs a coal, burning coal, puts it in his mouth, burns his tongue.
Right. Yeah, it's a beautiful midrash. But it is interesting because, and you find this is true for many biblical texts and also outside of the Jewish tradition. I'm thinking to the Christian Bible, there's like a very large chunk of time during Jesus's formative years that are not spoken about in that text. Also, coincidentally, in Egypt. And so we have a lot of these, figures where we're sort of mysterious growings up, mysterious things that we don't know a lot about them because the text chooses not to speak of it. It's very interesting, but there's not a whole ton of tradition in the Christian community of midrash like we have in.
Right.
So, but you have these lovely midrashim that sort of help us to put Moses' character into context, help us to sort of understand how he sort of came to be himself. And it must have been interesting to grow up in an Egyptian palace. Yeah. Ten Commandments does not do this particularly well.
Right. No. The Welsh Yul Brynner,
Right.
Charlton Heston. I mean, two powerhouse actors back in the day.
Yes.
There's a whole idea, and it was kind of formulated by Joseph Campbell, and wrote the book The Hero with a Thousand Faces. The idea that there's a hero narrative that is cross-cultural and plays out. You see it in Tanakh, you see it in other ancient Near Eastern mythologies, you see it even in contemporary times. And Jeremy behind the glass over here, I don't know, Jeremy, if you're familiar with the narrative. The narrative is that you have kind of the hero is born. The hero is an orphan. Moses doesn't have parents, at least initially, the parents are not identified. The hero has some sort of life-changing experience. The hero is probably given some kind of power or begins to discover that the hero has a power. The hero goes on a quest, crosses a border, finds an object like a grail, some object that is not in the world, brings it back into the world. That's the hero narrative. So you see that with Moses. Again, the orphan origins, despite the fact that we later learn who his parents are, and then he has this experience taken into Pharaoh's palace. He later will have even a more dramatic experience here in Exodus 3, the burning bush. And then his quest will be to find the Torah. To get the Torah, you have to cross over up to the top of the mountain. You're at the mountain, and you bring the object back into the world. But that's also really the narrative for Star Wars. That's the narrative for Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, Star Wars just a Western.
It is, but it's the discovery of the power of the Force. Luke Skywalker, an orphan.
But also, aren't those also many of the stories, and not just the discovery of something, but also the discovery of within themselves.
For sure.
Also,
right.
Which we see with Moses.
Right. It's the old idea. I talked about this in a sermon a few weeks ago, that there's just two stories. Either there's a quest, or there's
somebody
a
comes to town.
Those are the only two stories. Every story fits into one of those patterns. Sometimes it's both at the same time, but that's it. Oh, no question.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, Batman's the same story, orphan. Superman's the same story, orphan. Like it's all, yeah. And there's a reason, because it works. That's why they use it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I'm tested.
Yeah.
So tell me, what do you think of Exodus 3? And
so yeah, the incident at the burning bush incident. The encounter at the burning bush is, I think, one of the most fascinating texts in all of the Torah. You're always going to have that when you have an encounter with the divine, right? And I think for Moses, obviously, this is a life changing for him to be there. But I think also it's a good way for regular people like you and me to think about our relationship with God and what that can look like, and that it's not on a mountain with a burning bush. Our encounters with God are much more down to earth, shall we say. But I think a lot of people are sort of frightened to open that door to let God in, to have that encounter with God. And I use the text as an example to be that this is something that we all have the ability to have, something that we can all reach for. And what does that encounter look like, and how can that change our lives? How I look at this text. But it's a beautiful language, beautiful text.
So you're getting at, the verse which says that God saw that Moses turned
Yeah,
to look. And the sense of that is that other people had walked by the bush and they didn't take note of it. They didn't see it. They didn't perceive it for what it was. But Moses, he looks, he sees, and God notices Moses' sensitivity to that moment and the possibility of the
right.
moment. And then God reveals God's self to Moses. One of my favorite midrashim comes from that moment right there where God begins to speak to Moses. And the midrash asks a fascinating question, which is, what was the voice that Moses heard? Right?
Yes, this is exceptional.
Yeah, and so it goes on to say ultimately that it was Moses heard the voice coming out of the bush in the voice of his father.
Right.
In the voice of his father, which always reminds me of we were talking about movies. Jeremy had gone out already. See, as soon as you leave staff meeting, we talk about movies. But we were talking about great movies, and there's that movie Contact.
Oh yeah, it's a great movie
with Jodie Foster.
Foster. Yeah.
You ever see that? So if you remember, it's about aliens, and they send a plan so that they can be contacted by the Earth folk, and Jodie Foster becomes the person who's going to make contact. Hence the name of the movie. And she goes and she arrives on this beautiful beach.
Yeah, through the wormhole.
Yeah. And the question is, what is the alien going to look like? What is it? And she sees in the distance something walking towards her, a creature walking, in the anticipation, this is the alien, this is the alien. And as the creature gets to her, it's her father.
With a recurring theme through the movie.
A recurring theme through the movie. But the idea, it's not really her father. It's the alien.
That's how she perceives.
Presenting themselves to her as her father so that she could feel a level of comfort.
Right.
And that idea in the Midrash, I think it's just a wonderful, beautiful idea. The comfort we find in the tradition, and we get it through the generations. Right?
And it's funny you mentioned for movies, every movie where they've shown this scene, so in the Ten Commandments, this is true. The Prince of Egypt, this is true. They're always trying to figure out who do you get to play the voice of God, right? As the burning bush. It's always the same voice of the actor who plays Moses. So in the Ten Commandments, the voice of God is the voice of Charlton Heston. The Prince of Egypt, whoever, I can't remember who plays Moses. Is it Ben Affleck?
It might be. I don't remember.
Or maybe, it's somebody like that. And, I think Ben Affleck actually is in the animated Joseph, King of Dreams. But it's somebody like, and it's the same. They use the same voice as the same actor. They, manipulate some a little bit, but it's always the same voice. And it's kind of interesting that they've chosen to do it that way. For sure, intentional. Yeah, for sure. Because, what does God sort of sound like? And to have an encounter with God could be perceived as terrifying. So that beautiful midrash about that he heard the voice of his father, again, this idea of comfort and this wisdom that comes with talking to your father, it's a beautiful midrash that I think helps to take something that could potentially be very scary into something
absolutely
much more relatable.
The other thing I love about this story is, and you see this in different places in Tanakh, particularly in Torah, where there's this sort of blurring that happens. That there's a thing, and in the end, the thing ends up being God. Right. It happens with Abraham and the strangers that come.
Mm-hmm.
Happens here with Moshe. It's the burning bush. Often there's an angel sort of in between the thing and then ultimately seeing it as God. It's just sort of this this blurring. What do you make of that? You ever?
Yeah, so I've always sort of seen that too. I actually see it in the Joseph narrative with when Joseph is walking trying to find his brothers, and then all of a sudden this man comes sort of walking down the road
Right.
from a distance, right? You can't really see who it is at first, right? And this man comes, and Joseph asks, "Have you seen my brothers in Dotan?" Right, that's where they went, and it sort of sets the stage for the rest of it. And I wonder, was that encounter with God or the angel or whatever it is? And I like that, it's sort of makes you put in a little bit of work to access the divine, right? It shouldn't be so easy, right? But, having a barrier there, I guess maybe sort of puts you in, want to put you in the right mindset before you can access that higher level. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it is that sort of blur. It's like that, an idea from the Gemara. I don't remember where exactly, it might be Sanhedrin, where it talks about the aspeclaria, right? This in modern Hebrew, an aspeclaria is a kaleidoscope. But I think the Gemara is referring to it as like either a mirror or some kind of lens, right? And there's two types, right? One is sort of a cloudy lens that is before everybody, and then there are people who perceive the world around them through either a clear one or a cloudy one, right? And the cloudy lens, sort of, you see the world kind of as it is, and you don't really, it's just like that's the world, right? That's what it is for you.
Gray and grimy.
Gray and grimy, right? Whatever color film is on there. But then there's this aspeclaria that is clear, and people who see through that can sort of look at the world and see, oh, this is God, right? So like you look at a flower, right? Some people will see just a flower, but other people will look at a flower and be like, this is God is creator of the universe. God created this flower, and see sort of God in all things.
Right.
And it's nice.
So yeah, I mean that also that whole blurring sort of experience to me has always had a sense of it's like what you can see on the periphery of your vision, and so you have this sense of God there, like but at the moment you turn to try to fix it, to really see it, it's gone, right? And that's that sort of theological struggle, that theological challenge, and the constant quest of understanding what God's presence can mean.
Yeah, and I think Moses spends a lifetime, I think, trying to work with that.
A lifetime, exactly, exactly. The varying degrees of success,
right?
And imagine the work, right? Personally, he's challenged in that way and working through that constantly, but also he's tasked with trying to get the people to follow that.
Right, and that we know is no easy task.
Yeah, and that's Sinai too, right?
Yeah.
You get to Exodus 19, and there's Sinai, and it's smoke, and it's obscure. You can't. What's actually going on up there?
That's also a great scene.
Oh,
in
great
Torah.
Scene. It's a great scene. Well, I think we're out of time. Yep, Jeremy is giving us the time to yanking us off the stage. As always, we appreciate you taking the time with us to think a little bit about this week's Parsha, beginning of the book of Exodus, Parashat Shemot. I want to thank our ritual director, Ben Kreshtool.
Thanks for having me.
The glass. Everyone have a great Shabbos. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.